Thank you for joining us for this sermon from Elk Grove Presbyterian Church in Elk Grove, California. Today is November 7th, 2021, the 24th Sunday after Pentecost. So those of you who may be watching this over the video, I hope that you find this sermon to be a blessing to you. And if you would like more information about our ministry here, please contact us through that information included on the video. The lectionary assigned gospel reading for today is Mark chapter 12, verses 38 through 44. Jesus is now in Jerusalem following his dramatic entrance on Palm Sunday. He is in the temple area each day, debating the religious leaders, and then as well teaching the many people who wanted to hear what he had to say. And the verse immediately preceding our today's reading says, "The large crowd listened to him with delight." So let's listen now to the Word of God from this 12th chapter of Mark, starting at the 28th verse. As he taught, Jesus said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. Such men will be punished most severely." And he goes on. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put into the temple offering plates and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a fraction of a penny. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "I tell you the truth, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all that she had to live on." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to
God, help us understand this challenging words from your word. Well, I want to start with 2 bits of good news for you. One that may elicit a bit of relief on your part. One that may elicit a bit of cynical laughter on your part. Relief. Though it could be, I'm not going to be using this text as a long sermon on stewardship given to the church. Stewardship is important. Okay? You think I should, or thank goodness. You'll be relieved. Let me just say, we know stewardship is important. It's about responsibly supporting the work of the church. And you've received information about that from Diane. And I encourage all of you to make responsible choices about your support of Elk Grove Presbyterian Church. But on a larger scale, stewardship is about how we use all of our resources as individuals, as families, as a church, as communities, as nations. Our economic resources, our physical resources, our emotional and spiritual resources. And I would say in what are obviously very, very troubling ways, times in so many ways, as disciples of Christ, I pray we will use our resources in responsible ways to help create a more caring, loving, healing community, reflecting God's love for all people. Stewardship is important, period. A sigh of relief. All right, how about a bit of something that may bring about a little bit of cynical laughter, right? Mark Zuckerberg, the creator and leader of Facebook, that internet platform that was supposed to bring about a worldwide community of connection and understanding, liberty. Well, Mr. Zuckerberg has announced a new name for that company, Meta. M-E-T-A, Meta, meaning greater or above or change, as in metamorphosis, changing into something new. You may remember a basketball player for the Kings by the name of Ron Artest. Pretty good player, not a superstar, hard worker, really aggressive. You remember what he changed his name to? Meta World Peace. I don't know what that was supposed to mean. It didn't make him a better basketball player, but as they say in basketball, no harm, no foul. Okay. But Facebook is becoming Meta. What a great sounding name. Isn't it inspiring? Almost brings tears to my eyes. This new name envisioning the ever greater future for all humanity brought about through Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. Yeah, right. Because it is rather interesting timing, isn't it? As I'm sure you know, it has been revealed that Mr. Zuckerberg and his company knew perfectly well that their platform was being used in ways that were really dangerous. Used to encourage anger and hatred in our community and around the world. Used to spread misinformation. Used to enable sex and drug trafficking. Used in ways that undermine the emotional stability of young people. All of which made Mr. Zuckerberg and Facebook lots of money. Lots of money. So what do you do when you are caught red-handed? Maybe even with blood on your hands. You don't know the connection between what was going on there and the rise in suicides. What do you do? What do you do? Hey, let's just come up with a new name. Let's find some catchy new phrases. Let's have a little kumbaya moment, please. Using the right sounding words has always been easier than doing the right kind of work. Just like garnering great honor to oneself has always been easier than trying to act honorably. Just like creating impressive ceremonies has always been easier than making needed change. Why worry about substance or meaning or truth when a bit of sleight of hand will do the trick quite well? Well, the gospel of Jesus Christ is about something very different, isn't it? It's about honesty and integrity. It's about deeply caring for people, not cynically using people. It's about a holy and mysterious God who, through Christ, is invested in the well-being of all people living on this magical little orb that we call Earth. A God who is invested in the well-being of this little orb itself. Of course, seeking God's vision of life for all of God's children may not be a way to maximize profits. May not be a way to enhance one's status or one's wealth. And those are the key issues in this morning's reading in Mark. Okay? Our reading involved two stories about the behavior of some of the elites in Jerusalem society. Those highly honored teachers of the law and elite wealthy citizens. In both cases, Jesus criticized them because their outward show of religiosity was at odds with their inner desire to garner praise and envy from other citizens. Those steeped in the law stooped to cheat vulnerable widows. Those with wealth trying to outshine one another in the grand gestures of giving money to the temple. A poor little widow gave what she had in a very quiet way. For Jesus, those religious leaders and those teachers of the law represented the exact opposite of what he understood the Jewish faith to be about. the exact opposite of what true worship of God was about. And in criticizing them, he was criticizing the whole Jewish religious and social culture of the time. A culture that might make a great show of following God's law, but abandoned the most basic demands of the Jewish faith to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with your God. Mark never pulled any punches in showing what got Jesus into trouble. Jesus was constantly calling into question both the beliefs and the behaviors of those claiming to be upholding the Jewish tradition. Mark was proclaiming that in Jesus, God was calling Israel to return to its most basic and most important tradition, seeking righteousness. These two stories were about people seeking not righteousness, but recognition. But let's remember, Mark wrote his book maybe 30 to 50 years after the events that he recalled here. So was he primarily interested in looking backward at the concerns Jesus had raised those years before with those in Jerusalem? I don't think so. I think he wanted to use what happened then to shine a light on what the church had been struggling with for the 30 to 50 years since then, like Ed, that you mentioned in that third book of John. And as we read those stories today, I think they can shine a light on what is happening in our own lives and in the church and in the culture in our own time. So much of what preceded these two stories, in those Jesus had been responding to the accusatory questions of those who were opposed to him. But in this case, in this story, Jesus was teaching, as we read in the verse before what we started with. A large crowd were listening to him with delight. Okay? These were not the religious elites. These were the people wondering, what's this all about? And then it was to a smaller group of disciples that he talked about the difference between how the rich people and that widow gave their money. Right? So it was not so much an accusatory finger he was pointing at those people that he talked about, as it was an issue he was raising for his followers about their own lifestyle and their own beliefs. An issue the gospel is continually raising in our own lives, in our own time, isn't it? It's as if he was asking, so what are you seeking? Righteousness or recognition? To live according to what God says will bring real meaning to your lives, or in a way that brings adoration or applause or envy or wealth from others. Raising that issue certainly would have hit home directly to his inner circle, those 12. Remember that they had earlier been debating about, well, which of them is the most important of them? What is the greatest? You remember that James and John had come and asked for special seats of honor in the earthly kingdom they thought Jesus was going to establish. And remember, the others were irked because they thought they would get in line ahead of them. And Mark, again, knew about the challenges and the conflicts the church had experienced, just as Paul's letter to the Corinth really revealed. We heard about that last week in our Bible study. Troubled church with lots of conflicts going on. And Mark certainly would have been very familiar with those letters that Paul had written numbers of years before Mark wrote his gospel. So recounting Jesus' words about those teachers of the law and those lavish donors at the temple, Mark wanted the church in his time to remember that needy egos, seeking to be filled with applause of other people, make it hard for those ego to be filled with what they really need, God's loving Spirit. And of course, that's the same issue being played out in our own lives, in our own time, lives all around us, lives around the world. how much striving after more control or more money or more power is an attempt to fill up that ego bucket. A bucket that can only be filled up with God's love. And that's what this communion table is about. The simplest food of bread and juice of God's love for us. To meet our most basic need to know that we're loved, we count, that we are valued. And it is when we allow ourselves to be filled with that food, that love from God, that we are free to let others know that they too are loved, that they count, that they are valued. That's what the gospel invites us to experience through the church. This often very goofy collection of us very imperfect people. That's what the church is. Experience God's grace. That's what allows the gospel to invite us to share with the rest of the world God's grace for all. Thanks be to God. Amen.